Welcome to Thueringer for Farming Simulator 15. We now continue in our reading of The Octopus, A Story of California by Frank Norris, Book 2, Chapter 3. Off there, Vanity made an uncertain gesture toward the north. Goodbye, and without another word he disappeared in the gray of the twilight. Presley was left alone, wondering. He found his horse and, tightening the girths, mounted and rode home under the sheen of stars, thoughtful as head bowed. Before he went to bed at night, he sent the toilers to the Sunday editor of a daily newspaper in San Francisco. Upon leaving Presley, Vanity, his thumbs hooked into his empty cartridge belt, strode swiftly down from the hills of the Los Muertos stock range and on through the silent town of Guadalajara. His lean, swarthy face, with its hollow cheeks, fine black pointed beard, and sad eyes, was set to the northward. As was his custom, he was bareheaded, and the rapidity of his stride made a breeze in his long black hair. He knew where he was going. He knew what he must live through that night. Again, the deathless grief that never slept leaped out of the shadows and fastened upon his shoulders. It was urging him back to that scene of a vanished happiness, a dead romance, a perished idyll. The mission garden in the shade of the venerable pear trees. But, besides this, other influences tugged at his heart. There was a mystery in the garden. In that spot, the night was not always empty, the darkness not always silent. Something far off stirred and listened to his cry, at times drawing nearer to him. At first this presence had been a matter of terror, but of late, as he felt it gradually drawing nearer, the terror had at long intervals given place to a feeling of an almost ineffable sweetness. But distrusting his own senses, unwilling to submit himself to such torturing, uncertain happiness, averse to the terrible confusion of spirit that followed upon a night spent in the garden, Vanity had tried to keep away from the place. However, when the sorrow of his life reassailed him, and the thoughts and recollections of Angel brought the ache into his heart and the tears to his eyes, the temptation to return to the garden invariably gripped him close. There were times when he could not resist. Of themselves, his footsteps turned in that direction. It was almost as if he himself had been called. Guadalajara was silent, dark. Not even in solitaries was there a light. The town was asleep. Only the inevitable guitar hummed from an unseen dobe. The enemy pushed on. The smell of the fields and open country and a distant scent of flowers that he knew well came to his nostrils as he emerged from the town by way of the road that led on towards the mission through Quinsabe. On either side of him lay the brown earth, silently nurturing the implanted seed. 2 days before it had rained copiously, and the soil, still moist, disengaged a pungent aroma of fecundity. Vanity, following the road, passed through the collection of buildings of Annixter's home ranch. Everything slept. At intervals, the air motor of the artesian well creaked audibly as it turned in a languid breeze from the northeast. A cat, hunting field mice, crept from the shadow of the gigantic barn and paused uncertainly in the open, the tip of her tail twitching. From within the barn itself came the sound of the friction of a heavy body and a stir of hoofs, as one of the dozing cows lay down with a long breath. Vanity left the ranch house behind him and proceeded on his way. Beyond him, to the right of the road, he could make out the higher ground in the mission enclosure and the watching tower of the mission itself. The minutes passed. He went steadily forward. Then abruptly he paused, his head in the air, eye and ear alert. To that strange sixth sense of his, responsive as the leaves of the sensitive plant, had suddenly come the impression of a human being near at hand. He had neither seen nor heard, but for all that he stopped an instant in his tracks. Then the sensation confirmed, went on again with slow steps, advancing warily. At last his swiftly roving eyes lighted upon an object just darker than the gray-brown of the night-ridden land. It was at some distance from the roadside. Vanamee approached it cautiously, leaving the road, treading carefully upon the moist clods of earth underfoot. 20 paces distant, he halted. Annixter was there, seated upon a round white rock, his back towards him. He was leaning forward, his elbows on his knees, his chin in his hands. He did not move. Silent, motionless, he gazed out upon the flat, somber land. It was the night wherein the master of Keensabe wrought out his salvation, struggling with self from dusk to dawn. At the moment when Vanamee came upon him, the turmoil within him had only begun. The heart of the man had not yet awakened. The night was young, the dawn far distant, and all around him the fields of upturned clods lay bare and brown, empty of all life, unbroken by a single green shoot. For a moment, the life circles of these two men, of so widely differing characters, touched each other, the air and the silence of the night, under the stars. Then, silently, Vanamee withdrew, going on his way, wondering at the trouble that, like himself, drove this hard-headed man of affairs, untroubled by dreams, out into the night to brood over an empty land. Then, speedily, he forgot all else. The material world drew off from him. Reality dwindled to a point and vanished like the vanishing of a star at moonrise. Earthly things dissolved and disappeared as a strange, unnamed essence flowed in upon him. A new atmosphere for him pervaded his surroundings. He entered the world of the vision, of the legend, of the miracle, where all things were possible. He stood at the gate of the mission garden. Above him rose the ancient tower of the mission church. Through the arches at its summit there swung the Spanish Queen's bells. He saw the slow-burning stars. The silent bats with flickering wings threw their dancing shadows on the pallid surface of the venerable facade. Not the faintest chirring of a cricket broke the silence. The bees were asleep. In the grasses, in the trees, deep in the calyx of punka flower and magnolia bloom, the gnats, the caterpillars, the beetles, all the microscopic, multitudinous life of the daytime drowsed and dozed. Not even the minute scuffling of a lizard over the warm, worn pavement of the colonnade disturbed the infinite repose, the profound stillness. Only within the garden the intermittent trickling of the fountain made itself heard, flowing steadily, marking off the lapse of seconds, the progress of hours, the cycle of years, the inevitable march of centuries. At one time, the doorway before which Vanamee now stood had been hermetically closed, but he himself had long since changed that. He stood before it for a moment, steeping himself in the mystery and romance of the place, then raising the latch, pushed open the gate, entered, and closed it softly behind him. He was in the cloister garden. The stars were out, strewn thick and close in the deep blue of the sky, the Milky Way glowing like a silver veil. Ursa Major wheeled gigantic in the north. The great nebula in Orion was a whirl of shimmering stardust. Venus flamed, a lambent disk of pale saffron, low over the horizon. From edge to edge of the world marched the constellations, like the progress of emperors, and from innumerable glory of their courses a mysterious sheen of diaphanous light disengaged itself, expanding over all the earth, serene, infinite, majestic. The little garden revealed itself but dimly beneath the brooding light, only half emerging from the shadow. The polished surfaces of the leaves of the bare trees winked faintly back the reflected light as the trees just stirred in the uncertain breeze. A blurred shield of silver marked the ripples of the fountain. Under the flood of dull blue luster, the graveled walks lay vague amid the grasses, like webs of white satin on the bed of a lake. Against the eastern wall, the headstones of the graves, an indistinct procession of gray cowls, ranged themselves. The enemy crossed the garden, pausing to kiss the turf upon Angel's grave. Then he approached the line of pear trees and laid himself down in their shadow, his chin propped upon his hands, his eyes wandering over the expanse of the little valley that stretched away from the foot of the hill upon which the mission was built. Once again he summoned the vision. Once again he conjured up the illusion. Once again, tortured with doubt, racked with the deathless grief, he craved an answer of the night. Once again, mystic that he was, he sent his mind out from him across the enchanted sea of the supernatural. Hope of what he did not know roused up within him. Surely on such a night as this, the hallucination must define itself. Surely the manifestation must be vouchsafed. His eyes closed, his will girding itself to a supreme effort, his senses exalted to a state of pleasing numbness. He called upon Angel to come to him, his voiceless cry penetrating far out into that sea of faint, ephemeral light that floated tideless over the little valley beneath him. Then, motionless, prone upon the ground, he waited. Months had passed since that first night when at length an answer had come to Vanamee. At first, startled out of all composure, troubled and stirred to his lowest depths, because of the very thing for which he sought, he resolved never again to put his strange powers to the test. But for all that, he had come a second night to the garden, and a third, and a fourth. At last his visits were habitual. Night after night he was there, surrendering himself to the influences of the place, gradually convinced that something did actually answer when he called. His faith increased as the winter grew into spring. As the spring advanced and the nights became shorter, it crystallized into certainty. Would he have her again, his love long dead? Would she come to him once more out of the grave, out of the night? He could not tell. He could only hope. All that he knew was that his cry found an answer, that his outstretched hands, groping in the darkness, met the touch of other fingers. Patiently he waited. The nights became warmer as the spring drew on. The stars shone clearer. The nights seemed brighter. For nearly a month after the occasion of his first answer, nothing new occurred. Some nights it failed him entirely. Upon others it was faint, elusive. Then at last, the most subtle, the barest of perceptible changes began. His groping mind, far off there, wandering like a lost bird over the valley, touched upon something again, touched and held it, and this time drew it a single step closer to him. His heart beating, the blood surging in his temples, he watched with the eyes of his imagination this gradual approach. What was coming to him? Who was coming to him? Shrouded in the obscurity of the night, whose was the face now turned towards his? Whose the footsteps that with such infinite slowness drew nearer to where he waited? He did not dare to say. His mind went back many years to that time before the tragedy of Angel's death, before the mystery of the other. He waited then as he waited now, but then he had not waited in vain. Then as now, he had seemed to feel her approach. seemed to feel her drawing nearer and nearer to their rendezvous. Now what would happen? He did not know. He waited. He waited, hoping all things. He waited, believing all things. He waited, enduring all things. He trusted in the vision. Meanwhile, as spring advanced, the flowers in the seed ranch began to come to life. Over the 500 acres where the flowers were planted, the widening growth of vines and bushes spread like the waves of a green sea. Then timidly, colors of the faintest tints began to appear. Under the moonlight, Vanity saw them expand in delicate pink, faint blue, tenderest variations of lavender and yellow, white, shimmering with reflections of gold, all subdued and pallid in the moonlight. By degrees, the night became impregnated with the perfume of the flowers. Elusive at first, evanescent as filaments of gossamer. Then as the buds opened, emphasizing itself, breathing deeper, stronger. An exquisite mingling of many odors passing continually over the mission, from the garden of the seed ranch, meeting and blending with the aroma of its magnolia buds and punka blossoms. As the colors of the flowers of the seed ranch deepened, and as their odors penetrated deeper and more distinctly, as the starlight of each succeeding night grew brighter and the air became warmer, the illusion defined itself. By imperceptible degrees, as Vanity waited under the shadows of the pear trees, the answer grew nearer and nearer. He saw nothing but the distant glimmer of the flowers. He heard nothing but the drip of the fountain. Nothing moved about him but the invisible, slow-passing breaths of perfume, yet he felt the approach of the vision. It came first to about the middle of the seed ranch itself, some half a mile away, where the violets grew, shrinking, timid flowers hiding close to the ground. Then it passed forward beyond the violets, and drew nearer and stood amid the mignonette, hardier blooms that dared look heavenward from out the leaves. A few nights later it left the mignonette behind, and advanced into the beds of white iris that pushed more boldly forth from the earth, their waxen petals claiming the attention. It advanced, then a long step into the ground, challenging the beauty of the carnations and roses. And at last, after many nights, Vanity felt that it passed, as if it trembling at its hardihood, full in the superb glory of the royal lilies themselves that grew on the extreme border of the seed ranch nearest to it. After this, there was a certain long wait. Then, upon a dark midnight, it advanced again. Vanity could scarcely repress a cry. Now the illusion emerged from the flowers. It stood, not distant, but unseen, almost at the base of the hill upon whose crest he waited, in a depression of the ground where the shadows lay thickest. It was nearly within earshot. The nights passed. The spring grew warmer. In the daytime, intermittent rains freshened all the earth. The flowers of the seed ranch grew rapidly. Bud after bud burst forth, while those already opened expanded to full maturity. The color of the seed ranch deepened. One night, after hours of waiting, Vanity felt upon his cheek the touch of a prolonged puff of warm wind breathing across the little valley from out the east. It reached the mission garden and stirred the branches of the pear trees. It seemed veritably to be compounded of the very essence of the flowers. Never had the aroma been so sweet, so pervasive. It passed and faded, leaving in its wake an absolute silence. And at length the silence of the night, that silence to which Vanity had so long appealed, was broken by a tiny sound. Alert, half risen from the ground, he listened, for now at length he heard something. The sound repeated itself. It came from near at hand, from the thick shadow at the foot of the hill. What it was he could not tell, but it did not belong to a single one of the infinite similar noises of the place with which he was so familiar. It was neither the rustle of a leaf, the snap of a parted twig, the drone of an insect, the dropping of a magnolia blossom. It was a vibration merely, faint, elusive, impossible of definition, a minute notch in the fine, keen edge of stillness. Again the nights passed, the summer stars became brighter. The warmth increased. The flowers of the seed ranch grew still more. The 500 acres of the ranch were carpeted with them. At length, upon a certain midnight, a new light began to spread in the sky. The thin scimitar of the moon rose, veiled and dim behind the earth mists. The light increased. Distant objects, until now hidden, came into view, and as the radiance brightened, Vanamee, looking down upon the little valley, saw a spectacle of incomparable beauty. All the buds of the seed ranch had opened. The faint tints of the flowers had deepened, but asserted themselves. They challenged the eye. Pink became a royal red. Blue rose into purple. Yellow flamed into orange. Orange glowed golden and brilliant. The earth disappeared under great bands and fields of resplendent color. Then at last, the moon abruptly soared zenithward from out the veiling mist, passing from one filmy haze to another. For a moment there was a gleam of a golden light, and Vanamee, his eyes searching the shade at the foot of the hill, felt his heart suddenly leap, and then hang poised, refusing to beat. In that instant, a passing light, something had caught his eye, something that moved, down there half in and half out of the shadow at the hill's foot. It had come and gone in an instant. The haze once more screened the moonlight. The shade again engulfed the vision. What was it he had seen? He did not know. So brief had been that movement, the drowsy brain had not been quick enough to interpret the cipher message of the eye. Now it was gone, but something had been there. He had seen it. Was it the lifting of a strand of hair, the wave of a white hand, the flutter of a garment's edge? He could not tell, but it did not belong to any of those sights which he had seen so often in that place. It was neither the glancing of a moth's wing, the nodding of a wind-touched blossom, nor the noiseless flitting of a bat. It was a gleam merely, faint, elusive, impossible of definition, and intangible agitation in the vast dim blur of the darkness. And that was all. Until now, no single real thing had occurred. Nothing that Vanamee could reduce to terms of actuality, nothing he could put into words. The manifestation, when not recognizable to that strange sixth sense of his, appealed only to the most refined, the most delicate perception of eye and ear. It was all ephemeral, filmy, dreamy, the mystic forming of the vision, the invisible developing a concrete nucleus, the starlight coagulating, the radiance of the flowers thickening to something actual, perfume, the most delicious fragrance, becoming a tangible presence. But into that garden the serpent intruded. Though cradled in the slow rhythm of the dream, lulled by this beauty of a summer's night, heavy with the scent of flowers, the silence broken only by a rippling fountain, the darkness illuminated by a world of radiant blossoms, Vanamee could not forget the tragedy of the other, that terror of many years ago, that prowler of the night, that strange, fearful figure with the unseen face, swooping in there from out the darkness, gone in an instant, yet leaving behind the trail and trace of death and of pollution. Never had Vanamee seen this more clearly than when leaving Presley on the stock range of Los Muertos. He had come across to the Mission Garden by way of the King Sabe Ranch. It was the same night in which Annixter Owl watched the stars, coming at last to himself. As the hours passed, the two men, far apart, ignoring each other, waited for the manifestation, annexed on the ranch, Vanamee in the garden. Prone upon his face under the pear trees, his forehead buried in the hollow of his arm, Vanamee lay motionless. For the last time, raising his head, he sent his voiceless cry out into the night, across the multicolored levels of the little valley, calling upon the miracle, summoning the darkness to give Angel back to him, resigning himself to the hallucination. He bowed his head upon his arm again and waited. The minutes passed. The fountain dripped steadily. Over the hills, a haze of saffron light foretold the rising of the full moon. Nothing stirred. The silence was profound. Then abruptly, Vanamee's right hand shut tight upon his wrist. There it was. It began again. His invocation was answered. Far off there, the ripple formed again upon the still black pool of the night. No sound, no sight, vibration merely, appreciable by some sublimated faculty of the mind as yet unnamed. Rigid, his nerves taut, motionless, prone on the ground, he waited. It advanced with infinite slowness. Now it passed through the beds of violets, now through the mignonette. A moment later, and he knew it stood among the white iris. Then it left those behind. It was in the splendor of the red roses and carnations. It passed, like a moving star, into the superb abundance, the imperial opulence of the royal lilies. It was advancing slowly, but there was no pause. He held his breath, not daring to raise his head. It passed beyond the limits of the seed ranch and entered the shade at the foot of the hill below him. Would it come farther than this? Here it had always stopped hitherto, stopped for a moment, and then, in spite of his efforts, had slipped from his grasp and faded back into the night. But now he wondered if it had been willing to put forth his utmost strength after all. Had there not always been an element of dread in the thought of beholding the mystery face to face? Had he not even allowed the vision to dissolve, the answer to recede into the obscurity whence it came? But never a night had been so beautiful as this. It was the full period of the spring. The air was a veritable caress. The infinite repose of the little garden sleeping under the night was delicious beyond expression. It was a tiny corner of the world, shut off, discreet, distilling romance, a garden of dreams, of enchantments. Below in the little valley, the resplendent colorations of the million flowers, roses, lilies, hyacinths, carnations, violets, glowed like incandescence in the golden light of the rising moon. The air was thick with the perfume, heavy with it, clogged with it. The sweetness filled the very mouth, the throat choked with it. Overhead wheeled the illimitable procession of the constellations. Underfoot, the earth was asleep. The very flowers were dreaming. A cathedral hush overlay all the land, and a sense of benediction brooded low. A divine kindliness manifesting itself in beauty, in peace, in absolute repose. It was time for visions. It was the hour when dreams come true. And lying deep in the grasses beneath the pear trees, Vanamee, dizzied with mysticism, reached up and out toward the supernatural, felt, as it were, his mind beginning to rise upward from out of his body. He passed into a state of being the like of which he had not known before. He felt that his imagination was reshaping itself, preparing to receive an impression never experienced until now. His body felt light to him, then it dwindled, vanished. He saw with new eyes, heard with new ears, felt with a new heart. "Come to me," he murmured. And slowly he felt the advance of the vision. It was approaching. Every instant it drew gradually nearer. At last he was to see. It had left the shadow at the base of the hill. It was on the hill itself. Slowly, steadily, it ascended the slope. Just below him there, he heard a faint stirring. The grasses rustled under the touch of a foot. The leaves of the bushes murmured as a hand brushed against them. A slender twig creaked. The sounds of approach were more distinct. They came nearer. They reached the top of the hill. They were within whispering distance. Vanamee, trembling, kept his head buried in his arm. The sounds at length paused indefinitely. The vision could come no nearer. He raised his head and looked. The moon had risen. Its great shield of gold stood over the eastern horizon. Within 6 feet of Vanamee, clear and distinct against the disk of the moon, stood the figure of a young girl. She was dressed in a gown of scarlet silk with flowing sleeves, such as Japanese wear, embroidered with flowers and figures of birds worked in gold threads. On either side of her face, making 3-cornered her round white forehead, hung the soft masses of her hair of gold. Her hands hung limply at her sides, but from between her parted lips of almost an Egyptian fullness, her breath came slow and regular, and her eyes, heavy-lidded, slanting upwards toward the temples, perplexing oriental, were closed. She was asleep. From out this life of flowers, this world of color, this atmosphere oppressive with perfume, this darkness clogged and cloyed and thickened with sweet odors, she came to him. She came to him from out the flowers, the smell of the roses in her hair of gold, the aroma and the imperial red of the carnations in her lips, the whiteness of the lilies, the perfume of the lilies, and the lilies' slender, balancing grace in her neck. Her hands disengaged the scent of the heliotrope. The folds of her scarlet gown gave off the enervating smell of poppies. Her feet were redolent of hyacinth. She stood before him, a vision realized, a dream come true.